Welcome to SQL for Absolute Beginners course lesson 1.4. In this lesson, we will just get familiar with the database, various database systems, and what are we trying to do with it. So this is going to be more of an introductory lesson. Now, so far we talked about that we have different books available, which we call tables, and the books are phone book and address book and so forth. Now, the question is, this is great because we found those books, meaning those books were available and they were already written in it. But how do we do right from the scratch in the database system, meaning in the computer system? Well, we have to create the book itself first. Without, it's like we won't be having a pen and a bound book available that you can start writing into it. In fact, that is the next step. So once we have that similar conceptual book available in the computer system, how do we write into that book? So we have to write those entries. We have to create that structure we saw, that are columns and rows. So we need to create those rows and things like that. So if you deep dive into the computer side now, then we have to start thinking about how do I even have that book available, and once I have the book, how do I write into it, right? It's a similar analogy will follow. So the good thing is we can find such a material that we can create our own book, and that is that software, and that they are called database management systems, or DBMS sometimes. Now, what does data management stand for? So what is the management about? Well, in database language or database parlance, you can say there are typical operations we need to do, which is called CRUD, C-R-U-D normally. Now, what is CRUD? C stands for create, R stands for read, U for update, and D for delete. Now, what do we create? Well, we need to create those records. As we saw in the phone book, we have to create a record. We may also need to create a table itself first if it is not there in existence. In fact, not only the table, but we can also create a schema itself, because we don't have a bundle. So we have to define, let's say there is a box, and we'll call it, hey, this is Thomas Edison's schema. That is the box. And then in that box, we'll start adding our books. And that's how we'll start creating different tables. So that's the idea. So we need to do lots of creation. And that's one of the operations that we can do through this database system, which is create part. That's for in the C. Now, read. So once the data is there, so once the table is there and things are written in it, and actually, as we said, like we can create records also. So that means we have data inserted into that book. Now we need to read back. We need to find out certain records, like what was the phone number of that person. Well, we can do it. Or how many invoices are pending for this particular person, we can find it, things like that. So there will be a reason to read data back after that the records are created. And then sometimes it will happen that we made a mistake. We might put an entry, either we made a mistake or it needs to be updated. Let's say we entered a phone number that was 2, 3, 5 years ago, and the person's phone number has changed now, so we need to update that phone number. Or sometimes we made a mistake and we entered some entry, instead of 100 we entered 10 or 1000, and we need to correct it. So there are various ways we need to update our records. So there will be another operation we have to follow, which is update operation, which is for U in CRUD. And lastly, sometimes we don't need certain things anymore. So either we don't want that record anymore, so we have to delete the records, or we can also delete the table itself, or sometimes you can delete the whole schema and you just wipe out everything. It depends what you want to do. So overall, this CRUD, C-R-U-D, all the operations will revolve around these 4 basic things. So that means create, delete, create, read, update, and delete. Now you can also do these additional things. That could be, we will need to define certain users who can access this. So not everybody can go and open Thomas Edison's books. He has to give only a few people, designated people, some privileged people that can access those books. So we have to define those users. We can also define certain security, like certain people can look at the phone book and address book but not the accounting books, or only certain things. So basically certain security can be applied. So that will be another thing. As well as sometimes we need to migrate or move data, like the book has become so old, the pages are not enough now, and we need to get a bigger book, and we need to transfer all the names in that phone book into the new book. So similarly, when we have a database, we have the tables in the computer, we may need to transfer from one computer to another, or one schema to read from here and do some migration to another, things like that, which is called import export operation. So overall, these kind of user management, security, data transfer, things like these operations, they are not typically CRUD operations, but still they are operations and they are related to database. They will be done by some administrator. So these are more of administration tasks, and that will be mostly normally done by the DBA. So there is a specific role defined, which is by database administrator, which is called DBA, which is a pretty common term you will find. So continuing now, the last thing I want to just touch upon is on this topic about just understanding database management is, so what we saw so far is that table is very simple. It has certain columns and some rows. Why do we want to make these kind of fancy database things when similar things we can get even through a spreadsheet program such as Google Worksheets or Microsoft Excel or things like that? Now the question is, yes, can that be done? Answer is yes, but the question it comes to, can it handle many records, millions of records, millions of worksheets, thousands of worksheets, let's say hundreds of at least? Can they relate to each other? Can they be handled and managed well? In those cases when it is too many records, too many tables, those type of things where the database systems will come into place, and they will be able to help us out in a much better way than just Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets or such programs. So the point is, they are definitely useful, but when it comes to larger systems, and that's why I want to now start your attention to start thinking big, in the sense that don't think about just the phone book and address book. They are still useful, but when it grows and to such an extent that we have millions and millions of rows, let's say you are talking about Facebook database, there are billions of people, everybody has their name, their email, and their profile. How will you handle that? It will be very hard to do that in Excel spreadsheet. Similarly, Twitter accounts or Google searches. There are so many different people. Gmail. Think about it. So these many rows and records, that will be very difficult to manage in Excel, and that's why we need to start thinking in terms of some database system, and that's what we are actually now going to consider more. Simple other examples could be social security data, driving license data, patients data, sales data. All these are millions and millions of records, number of tables. Those are going to be very difficult to manage. So I'm just making my point that these systems that we are going to talk about, they can handle all these kind of very complex and very highly large data sets very efficiently and very effectively. So what are these systems? Well, some of these names you might have heard. They are called Oracle, MySQL, SQL Server, PostgreSQL, and there are many other ones, but these are very common or well-known ones. Now, one quick thing I want to add to this is that I said there are multiple tables going to be, and if you remember, we talked about in the schema, these tables, when they belong to a schema, they could be usually related. So all these systems, Oracle, MySQL, SQL Server, PostgreSQL, they are also called RDBMS, which is R stands for relational. So this is a database system, but the tables are related. So that's why they are called relational database systems, or RDBMS. So just keep that in mind. And lastly, there are some buzzwords you might have heard is about big data nowadays. Now, big data is a special type of data, and we are not going to be focusing on that very much into detail. It's just a cursory look we might just refer to, but overall our focus is just RDBMS type of basic data which are available in this system. Now, how do we get this system? Right, these are enterprise level systems, but the good news is all of these vendors, Oracle, MySQL actually is an open source, and they also have multiple editions. They call it community edition or enterprise edition, so for commercial use. SQL Server is from Microsoft, same way. PostgreSQL is another open source. So all of these different types of database systems, they all provide a free edition. That's a great news. And as long as we are using it for personal use, which in our case, yes, we are, and we can download it from anybody, any of these well-known database providers. So we are going to focus on called MySQL database. They all are same, like whether we go for Oracle or SQL Server, it's the same thing, but I thought MySQL is much easier to start with, and once you get understanding of one database, it's very easy to apply the same logic into any other system. They all follow certain standards. So let's say select star from, if you write in MySQL or in Oracle or SQL Server, they all will understand the same way and interpret the same way. As long as they have the data, the system will be able to provide you the output. So having said that, we are going to focus on MySQL, and there will be a few additional things, but that may be very specific to, let's say, Oracle, that Oracle only understands the certain commands, or SQL Server for that matter, or others. But usually the standards are pretty common, and we don't need to worry about those very specific cases. They are for advanced users, so we'll skip those. All right, so what I was trying to tell you is that after all this information, that you know what is the concept of a table, what's the concept of a database or a schema, what's the concept of how to write the basic query, I think we are ready to dive into real database systems itself. And for that, we need to now, first step is obviously we need to install the database. But before we install, we have to do one quick check, and which is just to make sure our system is ready, that necessary components are there available on the computer. And we are going to focus on the Windows PC because that's what I use. But the installations instructions on any of these systems, they are pretty specific, and you can always follow if you have a Mac machine, or even if you have a Unix system, they all will have very specific instructions that you can follow. But to make it simple, again, we are going to use the Windows installation instructions. So get ready to start installing on our Windows PC. Thank you, and talk to you soon.